We support Ukraine fully in this moment, and we have since the start of this conflict. We're going to continue to do whatever it takes to give them the capacity to defend themselves.
The United States has vowed to support Ukraine in all ways possible to fight off Putin's forces. Bolstered by the midterms, Biden says the US will do whatever it takes to help Ukraine defend itself. Will the Republicans force Biden to reconsider the flow of US dollars in aid to Ukraine? But how much has the US really spent on the Ukraine war? Since Russia launched its invasion in February, the US Congress has approved tens of billions in emergency security and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. The Biden administration has shipped billions worth of weapons and equipment from US military inventories. According to Kiel Institute, a German think tank, the US has transferred military and non-military aid worth $54 billion to Ukraine so far. Now, the Biden administration has asked Congress to provide over $37 billion in emergency aid to Ukraine, which would put the total aid at a whopping $91.43 billion. This amount is larger than the GDP of the US state of Maine, for example, and even countries like Sri Lanka. In fact, even the GDP of Ukraine before the war stood at around $200 billion US dollars. Another statistic that highlights the leading role taken by the US in aiding Ukraine is a comparison with aid sent by other nations. While the US's aid to Ukraine stands at $91.43 billion, European Union member nations and institutions together have provided $30.45 billion to Ukraine. The United Kingdom ranks second on the list, pledging less than $4 billion, far less than America. However, both countries' military aid commitments amount to approximately 0.1% of either country's respective GDPs. In fact, if GDP is taken as a metric, Ukraine's neighbors have contributed more to its war effort. For instance, Poland's military aid to Ukraine amounts to 0.3% of its GDP, while Latvia's military aid amounts to 0.9% of its GDP. However, the US's combined military, financial and humanitarian aid delivered or pledged to Ukraine adds up to 0.25% of the country's GDP. Other big donors of military aid to Ukraine are Germany and Canada, even though their relative pledges only amount to 0.03% and 0.06% of their respective GDPs. The US total aid of $91.43 billion is more than Russia's most recent annual defense spending of $77.7 billion. President Putin, however, is looking to spend far more on the military in the next 2 years than initially planned. Mark Kansian, a defense expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told Reuters that the total US price tag for the Ukraine war is relatively small, considering the Pentagon's $800 billion annual budget. He said, and I quote, "Many strategists, and I would put myself among them, would say this is a reasonable amount of money and it's cost-effective," unquote. It's also pertinent to note here that the US may be spending billions more if they were involved directly in the conflict. The US government spent nearly $2.313 trillion in operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan until the Taliban took over in 2021. The US government spent nearly $73 billion in military aid to Afghanistan, billions more on the country's reconstruction, and approximately $837 billion just going to war. In comparison to the amount spent in Ukraine, the Biden government committed to investing just $44.9 billion to tackle the climate change crisis. Now to student loans. The Biden administration's student loan relief program is estimated to cost an average of $30 billion annually over the next decade. With the Republicans set to take control of the House, there is apprehension that the US may tighten the purse strings vis-à-vis Ukraine. On the 17th of November, Republican lawmakers vowed to give more scrutiny to financial support for Ukraine once they take control of the House of Representatives in January 2023. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who's poised to take over as Speaker in the House, earlier warned that the GOP is not going to write a blank check to Ukraine. With reports emerging of the US secretly pushing Ukraine to hold talks with Russia, the question is the US developing war fatigue? Or will the funds continue to flow to Ukraine?